Good evening and welcome to the January 4th, 2024 City Council Special Meeting. And Happy New Year. I am Mayor Ross, and tonight's special meeting is being brought to you live using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. Tonight's recording will be posted on the city's YouTube channel. So welcome to everyone. City Clerk Dean, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Benson.
Here.
Councilmember Watton.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Washington. Councilmember Cotton.
Here.
Councilmember Christensen.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
And Mayor Ross.
I am here. And Councilmember Washington has requested an excused absence from tonight's meeting. Is there a motion to excuse Councilmember Washington?
So moved.
Second. Is moved by Councilmember Johnson and seconded by Councilmember Cotton. Any discussion?
Darn. It was close.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So it passes unanimously and Councilmember Washington is excused. So tonight, our first item of business is to approve the agenda. Council may have a motion to approve the special meeting agenda.
So moved.
Second. Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, second by Councilor Christensen. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, the special meeting agenda is approved. So the first agenda item tonight is a revenue source presentation from our budget manager, Jana Walker. And she will, and also Director of Finance, Drew Boutte. So they will walk us through the revenue sources presentation and different options.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor. Good evening, Council. It's great to have you here tonight. As the Mayor said, we are discussing some city revenue options. What we're hoping for from this meeting tonight is some direction about what kind of revenue options we want to pursue either next week, a couple weeks, or if you need any sort of additional information for what we're presenting here today. I just want to note that the administration is not seeking approval of all 5 revenue options. It's just to put this on the table for you to consider, basically as much as possible as you need for the most part. In addition to that, the administration, along with council over time, has looked at efficiencies within the city itself, including potential staffing reductions and things like that, to make the city obviously more efficient while protecting levels of service. And so the city has certainly made an effort to find ways within its own funding currently right now in order to sustain services. After that kind of discussion, we're coming back to you here tonight to kind of discuss these 5 revenue options in order to close the gap within our financial forecast. So to start off with, we are focused. This thing will move forward, which apparently it won't. So technical difficulties. And stop screen sharing. Let me get off that one. There we go. Next slide. So Jan's been up in front of you over the past 3 to 4 months, describing some of the problems that we've seen within our governmental operating fund, especially our general fund, over the past 4 months. The governmental operating bucket within our city overall funds things such as police, fire, parks maintenance, and street maintenance. And consequently, we're here tonight to kind of describe some of the 5 revenue options that we have in front of you that could support and sustain that governmental operating bucket moving forward. And so we're going to go through some revenue options, talk a little bit about the survey that you've seen recently, go through the forecast that's been presented relatively recently, and then discuss the 5 agenda bills that are in front of you tonight. Lastly, towards the end, we do have a dynamic Excel file for us to click on and off if we need to, that would show what the impact of each revenue would have in comparison to the expenditure line that we've been showing over time. In addition, we're going to describe for you the household burden and then provide you with a summary of all the 5 separate revenue options as a part of this presentation. So once again, why are we here tonight? Well, we know that from our experiences during the pandemic, we certainly have seen inflation impact the city overall. In addition to that, the city's general fund revenue portfolio is primarily, or plurality is made up of property tax revenue. A property tax revenue source that can really only increase 1% annually unless there's new construction from development that takes place, or if we go out to the voters for a property tax levy to lift. With 8 or 9% increases in inflation over the past couple of years, the 1% that we're generating on property tax revenue isn't sufficient in order to cover those expenditure increases over time. In addition to that, the city recently approved an agreement with the Teamsters Union as well, which resulted in some COLA increases in which the city has to. And then lastly, in addition to that, the Snoqualmie tribe has put the Salish Lodge into trust, which means we're no longer generating the revenue from the Salish Lodge anymore for the most part. And so consequently, we have to make up that difference in order to maintain our police and fire services moving forward. Now, I will say on that alone, the city is actively working with the Snoqualmie tribe to figure out a solution in regards to that, but there's certainly no guarantee that we'll be able to collect the revenues that we've lost from the Salish Lodge moving forward. So next, the 5 revenue options that we're presenting for you tonight are highlighted in orange. We're presenting to you a 0.1% transportation benefit district sales tax, a 0.1% public safety sales tax, a B&O tax increase from 0.15% to 0.2%, utility tax increase from 9 to 12% on the city's combined utilities, which is made up of water, sewer, and stormwater, as well as our solid waste collection. And then lastly, a levy lift. There's certainly some other options that we can explore, given if council would like us to. For example, one of the options on your table here is the square footage tax, which we do know that certainly some businesses on the ridge may not pay as much as others necessarily do, just based on what they distribute to different areas around the state. And so consequently, that may be an option that we potentially would want to pursue. In addition to that, you'll see some other options here as well that we can certainly look into. We do know for a fact, we've got Tammy Wood, our revenue manager here today, that is in charge of managing the comprehensive fee study. There certainly is a fee study listed on your table here that we plan on engaging in across the year. And in addition to that, you also see a B&O tax audit, which we do know that many of the businesses are operating on the honor system with us. It would be good to go out for that audit to see what we're exactly missing, and we intend to accomplish that this year as well. So with that said, I just want to touch a little bit upon the survey results. One of the questions that was posed is, which of the following best describes how the city of Snoqualmie should balance revenues and expenditures in the next year? One of them was to increase property taxes and maintain services. And when I look at property taxes, I think you could probably bracket that and say any sort of tax proposal. You could probably replace property taxes with any sort of tax proposal in there and probably get the same result. In addition, the second one was a combination of property tax increases and reduced service delivery. And the third option was maintain current property taxes and reduce services. The most supported option was the first one that you see at your screen there, which was to increase property taxes and maintain services such as police, fire, street maintenance, and parks maintenance. Next is the financial forecast that the finance department has commonly presented to council. Once again, what you'll see as a part of this is a growing gap across time because our expenditures are increasing at a faster pace than our revenues in the amount that we can generate. As described earlier, that's a consequence of the 1% property tax cap that we have to deal with. When we talk about the Fed and what they're doing, their target is a 2% inflation rate. So annually, in good years, we're always going to be falling behind, no matter what, because our revenue portfolio in the general fund is so heavily weighed towards property taxes. Just to go over a few of the points here, the crossover point that you'll see, and there's a line indicating as such, is in the year 2025, when we expect our recurring expenses to exceed our recurring revenues. That's soon, that's really soon, and that's what we're trying to contend with today. What you'll notice as part of this chart as well is what I've been affectionately referred to as the shark fin. I think what you see there, the little bump in revenue between 2023 and the 2024 budget. Just go over that shark fin a little bit. The city is generating, has gone out and received ground emergency medical transport billing revenue Consequently, what that means is the city is now receiving money from the Healthcare Authority for all of the Medicaid and I think Medicare expenses that are incurred from the fire department. And so consequently, we've built that into the general fund forecast that you see here. In addition, as a part of the budget, we did incorporate the comprehensive fee study when council adopted that back in December of 2022. And so that's why you'll see a bump between 23 and 24. And then lastly, as a part of the revenue chart that you see here, we did subtract out the Salish revenues as well. So it's lower than what you would have seen in the past, just because they have put their property into trust and we're no longer generating the revenue from all the great business that is happening out at that site. In terms of the expenses that you see here, we've incorporated the mid-biennial budget adjustment amendment as a part of the expenditure line that you see here. And in addition to that, we've also incorporated the Teamsters agreement too as a part of that line. So what are some of the things missing from the forecasted expenditures here? Well, we know that we're engaged in a negotiation with the Snoqualmie Police Association, which represents commonly police officers as well as sergeants. In addition to that, we know that the IAFF, which is basically the union that represents firefighters, their contract expires after 2025, which we're going to have to contend with any sort of increases that may come with that. And so consequently, as a result of that, you may actually see this expenditure line shift up into the future based on those two negotiations. And so with that,
Councilmember Johnson, yes, question?
And again, this is the operating, this is not capital. So this isn't factoring in, say, inflation for construction costs for future projects. Is that correct?
that is correct. So we are focused on what I would consider, there's
Yeah.
4 buckets total across the city. Governmental operating, which is basically your general taxes that supports police, fire, parks maintenance, street maintenance, admin, as well as a part of that. Got another bucket for governmental capital, which is primarily your parks capital, your transportation capital, your facilities capital. That's primarily funded through one-time sources of sales tax revenues, real estate excise taxes, maybe some impact fees, grants, as well as a huge component to that too. Got a third bucket, which is self-contained for utilities, what we might call enterprises for the most part, and your user fees, your ratepayer fees basically sustain that. Your water bills pay for that itself. And then we also have internal services that collect revenue from all the other departments in order to sustain that. So that would include things like IT, facilities maintenance, and fleet. And so we are only really focused on that first bucket really here tonight. And so with that said, getting into the 5 options before you tonight, Agenda Bill 24-004 is the TBD sales tax. It's important to note that non-residents bear some of the responsibility for this. So this is not borne completely by the residents of the city. As council is well aware of, we do have tourists that come to this wonderful city, primarily visiting the falls, but then they leave the falls and they come downtown and they enjoy a good evening or wonderful afternoon here with this train station in the background and so on, and ideally spend their dollars here. With that said, this agenda bill would raise the TBD sales tax by 0.1%. This is a councilmanic increase, which means it doesn't need to go to the voters. So the council will have the opportunity to impose this. It would be used for transportation improvements, including the operations and maintenance. And Snoqualmie citizens voted in November of 2021 to approve a 0.2% transportation benefit district sales tax. That portion was voted. It's required to be voted, but council now has the option through the state legislature to impose an additional 0.1% on top of that, basically, by your own accord. And so with that said, this would in essence generate roughly, starting in 2025, $319,000, escalated by inflation from there. The reason why you see 2024 a little bit lower is when it would actually go into effect. So if council were to say adopt this, I think, ordinance next Monday, waive the second reading, we can certainly send off a letter to the Department of Revenue. They would then start charging that sales tax at the quarterly date, which is April the 1st, which means we wouldn't really start collecting revenue from that until June of this year. If we delay it beyond the January the 16th date, That means it would fall to the next quarter, which means the DOR would not impose it really until June the 1st, which means we wouldn't really start collecting that until August, September. And so consequently, in addition to that, let me go to the next slide. This tax must be renewed every 10 years. So we'd have to return to council asking for approval to continue the tax beyond 2034. The second option in front of you is the B&O tax here. This agenda bill would raise the B&O tax rate from 0.15% to 0.2%. This is also a councilmanic increase. Revenue is unrestricted, which means it can apply to anything within the governmental operating fund. Businesses with a quarterly gross receipts less than $5,000 will remain exempt from the tax. And then we anticipate that this tax, if imposed, would raise roughly $253,000 in 25, escalated from there for 26 through 28. Given the timing of which we would choose to impose this, we would anticipate roughly $123,000 in 2024. The effect on the top 10 businesses in the city pay roughly 50% of our total B&O tax that we collect. These businesses would pay an additional $14,000 on average. Over 80% of the businesses pay less than $500 annually, and these businesses would expect to see less than $167,000 increase annually. On average, an annual increase across all applicable businesses is roughly $273, and the median annual increase across all applicable businesses is roughly $31, to give you guys some sense of context around how much this would result in or impact our business community. So with that said, the next option before you, Agenda Bill 23-00.
Becca, do we
Yes.
have any
Mayor Pro
data?
Tem Holloway, can you lean into this also?
Do we have any data of comparable B&O taxes for neighboring cities and whatnot?
I don't think we have anything with us tonight, but we
Okay,
can
that's
certainly
it.
work on collecting that information.
Thank you.
Councilor Johnson.
And did you, I think it was just back one slide. From there. Yeah, that's 0.8. It was just how much that would get. Okay, got it.
All right. So Agenda Bill 23-006 would be the utility tax increase, raising the utility tax rate from 9% to 12% on the city's combined utility, which once again is water, sewer, and stormwater.
Can
as
you
well as-
forward this slide, please?
Oh,
Thank you.
my apologies. Next one. As well as solid waste collection. This is also a councilmanic increase, so council has the opportunity to approve this without it going to the voters. Revenue is unrestricted by the state of Washington. Consequently, across the entire general fund. Average customers would expect to see an additional $4.89 monthly on their city utility bill. That's excluding solid waste collection. So this is just on how much you pay in terms of your water bill to the city. In terms of the increase in revenue generated from an increase from 9% to 12%, we'd expect to collect roughly $369,000 in 2025. 2024 is a little bit less, just depending on the timing of which we impose it. 2025 would be escalated from there, really based on what we do in terms of our utility rates moving forward. Okay. All right, so the next one is Agenda Bill 23-007, the public safety sales tax. This agenda bill would result in the submittal of a ballot proposition to the voters regarding a public safety sales tax increase of 0.1%. I think it's important to note with all these sales tax increases, we can't go beyond that. That's what's limited to us by the state legislature. By the way, we currently have a 8.9% total sales tax rate in the city. That's far less than what cities within the Regional Transportation Authority, often commonly referred to as Sound Transit, have to pay. And so we would maintain a tax advantage on that, even if we were to, and the voters in this case, even if they were to impose a 0.1% increase. The administration intends to use 100% of this sales tax for criminal justice and fire protection, basically our police and fire departments. And it requires a simple majority of voters at a primary or general election date. So in essence, we would propose for this one specifically, at this time in April, or sorry, not April, but August primary election date. In essence, this would generate roughly in 2026, $279,000, escalated from there. In 2025, potentially just a little bit less because we wouldn't really start collecting anything much until roughly March of 2025.
Councilor
Um,
Christensen.
Thank you. So based on the memo, it sounded like we would be allowed to do the increase of 0.1%. However, if King County elected to go forward and do a similar public safety sales tax, what would the implication then be for ours? Would, after it was voted, if it was passed, would it just be null and void?
So I think if we get ours in first, for example, then we're grandfathered into whatever, and they'd have to give us a credit for that, basically, back. Mhm. Mhm. You know, as a consequence of this, King County would receive 15% of the total collected from here as well, just based on their reading of the state law.
Thank you.
The next one, the last one on your list of these 5 options is Agenda Bill 24-008, the property tax levy lid lift. This agenda bill would result in the submittal of a ballot proposition to the voters regarding a single year permanent property tax levy lid lift of roughly 11 cents per $1,000 assessed valuation. It would require voter approval with a simple majority and no minimum turnout requirements. The total regular levy is approximately 8.62 million, including the council approved $76,000 increase on November 7th, 2023. In essence, we were working from roughly $500,000 in order to try to close our gap for the most part. We'll get to the next slide, which shows what the household burden is, but basically it's going to cost a homeowner with $1 million property roughly $106 annually to generate $500,000 of property tax revenue for the city overall to sustain our services.
But,
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
and what is shown here would be a permanent property tax levy lid.
It would.
And then from there, though, the proceeds would be subject to the 1% increase per year.
Yes, it would.
Okay, that's a nitnoid. Put $5,000 in 2026 and whatever the math works out from there.
Okay.
Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. I want to make sure they understand this because they're, I thought that the property tax levy lid lift was a much more simple thing. Turns out that there are several different types of this. Those we learned about last time. So this is single year permanent property tax levy lid lift.
Yes.
Single year permanent, that sounds like 2 things that are not the same thing. Do you understand
Okay.
what that means?
So basically,
Permanent for 1 year?
we're starting with our 8.62 and then we're bumping up $500,000 and that becomes the new base that would then continue into the future.
Okay, so it only bumps up 1 year, but then
1
it
year.
stays there.
And then it would stay there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
It
you.
doesn't go away
Yeah.
after 6 years, basically, which is what I think the impermanent one was suggesting.
Right,
Yeah.
the way you could do like another one was like for 10 years, it could go up by some percentage every
wanted-
single
yeah.
year, right?
You could
Okay,
do
I
like
get that.
5 cents every year, basically, and it would just escalate up like that. But in
That's
this
the
case, we
difference.
just kept it very, very simple. In this situation and just raised it $500,000 over just 1 year, basically, by 11 cents per $1,000 assessed valuation right now.
Got it.
Mhm. So with that said, in terms of the household burden, we've got all 5 options here and what the impact we believe would be on basically a household within Snoqualmie. The TBD sales tax increase is expected to burden a household here roughly $30. The B&O tax is not applicable necessarily to a household. The utility tax increase would roughly impact a homeowner or resident here roughly $77 per year annually. The public safety sales tax would roughly impact a resident $30 annually. And then the levy lid lift is roughly $106 for a property owner that owns $1 million house. And there's assumptions that certainly go into this. So we're assuming that the average household spends within the city roughly $30,000, that the average solid waste bill is roughly $600 annually, and the average home value is roughly $1 million as well. It's part of that. And then lastly, we've got just a summary table to assist everyone as well. Some of the kind of categories that we considered, what's the revenue overall to the city? What's the burden on the residences of the community, or residents of the community. What's the assumed growth of future revenues? Is this voted or councilmanic? What's the speed of implementation? And do non-residents support the tax revenue or not? So we've got this kind of table available for you to assess as well. And then lastly, I'd like to just bring up the point that we do have a dynamic spreadsheet as indicated at the beginning, in which we can click off and on different options to mix and match kind of the revenue sources depending on council's direction.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
So in the prior version of this, there was another slide that showed how our property levy rates compared to other communities. You still have that slide handy?
It may very well be within the agenda bill itself,
It
if I
is.
recall. So we can try going to that.
Which one is this? This is 06.
Worst case, it was in the one we did for F and A last night.
See.
It's
I
on,
think, right.
it's item 6 in, it's
Mhm.
in, oh wait. Yeah, oh yeah, it's that one.
That one.
Oops, maybe too big. See if we can squeeze it all in. No, we can't squeeze it all in. Okay. So what this table is showing is basically the property tax levy rate that the cities collect across some comparables here. What their total levy rate is per $1,000 assessed valuation. We also have to remind ourselves that here in Snoqualmie, roughly 20 cents out of every dollar of property tax revenue comes back to the city. But the majority of that, the other 80 cents, goes to King County, the school district, the state school fund, basically. And so consequently, what you tend to see is the total levy rate far exceeds the property tax levy rate that the cities collect overall. So in Snoqualmie, roughly $1.57 per $1,000 assessed valuation comes back to the city. But the difference between $8.72 and the $1.57 goes towards all those other jurisdictions to pay for their services as well.
Councilor Benson.
Isn't that true for all the cities though?
Well, yeah, I'm just pointing out, for people reading at home, I would say. Mhm,
Well, I think people reading at home might look at that first column there
mhm.
and say, gosh, why is Snoqualmie so much higher than all the other cities
Mhm.
to begin with? Can you give me an easy answer for that?
Well, it depends on the levels of service that we want to provide to the community, as well as what's available to us in terms of revenues. So some of those other cities, for example, like Woodinville and North Bend, even Issaquah, for example, have a higher sales tax base that they can utilize basically to continue to support their services. And so we don't necessarily have that same sort of business tax base available to us here. And so we're often reliant upon property taxes in order to support the continuation of government services.
That was a really good answer.
If I can add to it, though, if you look at North Bend, for instance, they have a parks district that's not included in there. Whereas we have parks is included in ours, right? And we also have fire in ours, we have police in ours. There's others that contract out for fire. So that would be perhaps a different fire district you would add to it. So North Bend, for instance, it's 0.82. But if you add their parks, you're going to add another 54 cents to it as well. So, Councilor Christensen?
Thank you. That's helpful, Mayor, as well. And I know that at the last presentation, we also got to see some of the sales tax rates of the neighboring jurisdictions as well. Do you have that handy too?
Do
Comparison?
we have it in the
That's
agenda bill?
in
or-
another one of the,
Mhm.
I think that was helpful to see as
Okay.
well. So
Councilor
we've got
Watton?
under there.
As they're looking for that, thank you, Mayor. I think what's useful in this, and to the point of parks and hospital districts and different tax authorities, junior tax authorities. If we look at the third column, that's really the impact it has on residents. So, you know, that's probably the best judge, knowing that there's lots of different junior taxing districts that fall into the overall property tax. But what is the impact to not only the homeowners, but we also have to keep in mind that commercial property owners pay far greater than what the individual homeowners pay. And that burden is passed on to them as well.
Certainly is. What I might suggest as a part of this overall conversation is that over time, commercial property owners haven't necessarily seen the same increases in assessed valuation that residences have within the community itself. And so some of that burden overall has shifted, I think, more towards the residents. Yeah.
Councilor Martin.
In support of that,
Mhm.
Assessor Wilson pointed out that 87% of all property taxes
Mhm.
are being paid by residents. So,
Mhm.
you know, just
Mhm.
to back up what you just said.
And I just want to reiterate the mayor's point as well. It's really critical. We are a full service city. This is basically a one-stop shop for fire, police. We have our own utilities as well as a part of this. If you were to go to North Bend, for example, it's largely a public works department with a community development department. And that's kind of what you're getting right from there. They're police services from here. They're using Eastside Fire and Rescue. They've got their own parks district, as you've suggested, and so on. So Sammamish as well is a very common example of a contract city versus a full city. So we're full service city.
Councilor Benson.
And also to that point, it is interesting, and to Mr. Councilman Watton's point, that looking first at the first column, we see $1.57 for Snoqualmie and 82 cents for North Bend, but the difference in the taxes for a $1 million home is just over $100. So, you know, which tells me that Snoqualmie's doing a pretty efficient job of being a full service city. Because it's not a huge difference.
And we have to also understand that North Bend's sales tax rate is greater than Snoqualmie. So they're right now, I think, at 9.0%, and we're at 8.9%. So there's a difference there. They also have a higher B&O tax rate. They have a 0.2% B&O tax rate, while Snoqualmie has a 0.15% B&O tax rate. So there are certainly some taxing differences for the most part that they've pursued that is different from what we've pursued over time. Mhm.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
But I want to, Councilman Benson, I want to answer your question in a different manner in that those rates are what they are based on what we, the council, voted in to the limit of our 1% per year and what the community has voted in. It wasn't too long ago that we did a public safety levy lid lift, particularly to maintain safety service and police, and that was voted in by the community. Okay, so some of that is just that represents that action of the community, as well as to some extent our 1% per year. But again, the 1% per year is not going to keep up with inflation.
Councilor Johnson.
I believe that at our last meeting, we also saw some pie charts from some of the other cities showing the distribution of the different types of funding, and that we had this large wedge of the pie for property taxes. It's like 80-20%, something like that for us, whereas other cities are much more spread out. Something to keep in mind. It's not like the same size of other taxes on top of this as the other cities do.
So she's trying to ponder, we're trying to ponder where that might be, but certainly within the Regional Transportation Authority, if you go down to Issaquah, I think they have a 10.1% sales tax rate, and we can certainly produce that and deliver that and send it out to council as well for your consideration. So that is the end of the presentation overall. What we're hoping for, excited for, is potentially some direction from council. Like I suggested, we also have a dynamic Excel chart for you to potentially play around with, and Jana's prepared to share that with you as well, about clicking on and clicking off, and hoping for some direction, maybe some rankings of maybe what revenue options you'd like to pursue. So thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Johnson?
I had one more question about the levy lid lift. I saw that it only needs a simple majority, and I must have gotten that confused in my head with a bond. Is that the one that requires 60% then? Okay. And I remember somewhere that there's something like you have to have a certain percentage. I think it was like 60% for that from the previous election or something weird like that, but that doesn't apply for a levy lid lift. Is that correct?
So it does apply for a levy lid lift.
Okay, so that
You
part
do have
still
to have a
does.
percentage of the voters that were participating in the previous election, basically, or I think registered voters basically participate
Okay.
within that, which is why we often deploy, say, a levy lid lift, or ask the voters for a levy lid lift in the general election or the primary election even. It is a presidential year as well. So we have to keep that in mind too, that this is probably the time in which you're going to get the most voters, registered voters participating.
Counselor Cotton?
Just looking at the graph, seems that, you have the non-diverging lines there, or the diverging lines. It is about the approximate difference between those two seem to kind of stabilize out to like around $1 million or more dollars difference?
No, unfortunately, it's going to continue to grow across time, just because we're limited to a 1% increase in revenues. And even in good years, our inflation is likely going to be around 2%. So as a consequence, you're always going to see that gap widen over time, basically. Sales taxes can get us to that because they generally increase at the rate of inflation. Property taxes, because we're restricted by the state law to really a 1% cap. And of course, there's new construction that can certainly happen, or we can go out to a levy lid lift if we wanted to, which is why this is part of the option here. But generally, we're always going to be falling behind, which is the dilemma that we're always constantly in this state. The state is basically forcing us, and I think in what former council member would say, into bankruptcy, as much as possible, unless we can somehow find it. Well,
Bankruptcy, I know.
well, it's unless we can find sufficient efficiencies internally or additional sustainable. Sustainable is such a massive concept, right, within the state that we have to adhere to. Yeah.
Is that with the levy lid lift, the number you folks had picked was the $500,000 a year. Is that a good start? Is that something that's also going to have to be addressed later?
It will certainly have to be addressed later too. So it basically buys you some time is what I would say. But then you're now relying or creating much more of a, you're not diversifying your portfolio, your general fund portfolio. You're in fact, I don't know what the opposite of diversify is right now, but you're becoming more reliant on property taxes as you move into the future, right? And so consequently, then you're always going to have to probably return to the voters every 3 or 4 years and ask for another levy lid lift, basically, in order to maintain your service levels if you're seeking that. Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
Okay, and as you, I guess I want to get us into a conversation of what target are we shooting for? As you pointed out, given structurally, the majority of our revenue is property tax, and that is, it's a declining tax as years goes on. Okay, just because we can only do 1%, inflation is seldom below 2%, if ever.
That's the target of the Fed.
Yeah,
So
this cumulative effect, those two lines will never close. Okay, do we want to look at how do we get the crossing of that line out 3 years? Or do we want to look at what we think are the near-term impacts that we're going to have? Majority of those being our labor costs are going to go up, and use that as a target to say near-term, how do I address that and move that smooth curve out? Which way do you guys want to go in that conversation? Or is that an appropriate path to go? Because right now I just have options of peg the needle on everything, and I don't think that's where we want to go.
Counselor Johnson?
Yeah, so I added up, there's a little fuzzy math here, but I added up the minimum amount of increase that we would get for each of these taxes per year if we did all of them. And then what would be the maximum amount? So it's kind of like a range. We kind of get bigger each year, apart from the levy lid lift. And the good news is that if we did all of them, that.
Hey,
That's not fuzzy. That's less fuzzy. That's basically what I found. So that's good. The good news is that that tells me that we don't necessarily have to go that route.
No.
We don't have to pick everything and try to shoot for it all because we overshoot the target. Whatever the target is, that seems a little bit excessive to me personally.
Counselor Watton?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I know that some of the impetus has come in light of our most recent negotiations, contract negotiations, which I believe the gap is something like 774 is the number or something.
537.
537, I've really, well, there was a 7 in there. So we've got that gap. We have other negotiations coming up as well that may impact us. My concern is this. We always look to see what we can do in the revenue side, which means going the easiest route is taking the easiest things that will get the least pushback from. My concern is this. There's please bear with me for a moment, is there is accounting for audit purposes, and Mr. Boutte is responsible for audit purposes and making sure that we do the right things according to the state auditor. The other side of accounting, and this is the one that I zero in more on from the nonprofit and from the for-profit private sector, and that is managerial accounting. And one of the things that public entities struggles with, and that's managerial accounting. For instance, a department head, in my ideal world, from where I come from, gets a report on regular compensation and overtime compensation, and it's right in front of me. And I can see that, we're way over on overtime. Something needs to happen. We as a council, and this is no reflection on the finance department or the administration, but we don't have those reports to say, wait a moment, if we hired one more person, we could reduce the overtime. And I'd really like for us to spend more time on the accountability piece so that it's very transparent. We do it in the private sector. I've done it in nonprofit work to make sure that we stay on task before we go out and say we're going to need to raise revenue or cut services. Maybe we need to manage what we have a little better. And that could be the form of a dashboard report that get through the finance department of F&A once a month, that all the directors know exactly where we're at. We can show the unions, hey, this is where we're at. This is why we're having a tough time trying to meet our expenses. But I think that we need to spend a little more time in having transparency. And I think it goes right back to the ratepayers, to the residents, the taxpayers. Is here, we've gone through, we cannot want any more ways to cut costs or to become more efficient. Here's the second piece to that. And that is, if we're looking at $570,000 in increase, we know basically it costs us $150,000 per person for benefits and salary and all that. It's equivalent of 3 to 4 individuals that over time, we just have to right size the organization and use the resources, the finances that come into the city. And that's, purely is an administration side is, hey, you may have budgeted for 100 positions, but we can only fund 95 positions. And I think that we need to get around that mindset as well. The third thing is, when you look at sales tax, and Director Boutte is exactly right, whoever goes down to Target and says, wait a moment, you know, I put all this stuff in my basket and I'm paying 10%, 10.1%, or I could go home, or I could do it on my phone and order it online, have it delivered here, pay less in taxes, and we get the sales tax. So I think, you know, if we're looking at changes, if we make these small changes in sales tax of 0.1%, one is for the transportation district, or and the second one is for safety, we can fill most of this gap. And you know what? We don't all pay that. It's the people that are visiting us, and the other things we order anyway. And so we're paying sales tax. So that's, you know, I'm always celebrating when I see 3 Amazon trucks going on my street at the same time. It's like, yes, sales tax. It's coming home. So, you know, I guess those are my thoughts on it. So I'm much more in favor of sales tax because we all pay it one way or another. I'm very concerned about increasing property taxes on residents. I'm very concerned about B&O tax. If you want to sit down and have a conversation with a business owner and say, well, we're going to talk about B&O tax, we're going to talk about head tax, they're going to say, why punish me? And the other thing too is when you stop to think about it, if you ever had to fill that out like I did for 10 years, the B&O tax, it's a pain in the butt. It's a pain in the butt. And we have an exemption of $20,000 a year. Issaquah's rate, which is lower at 0.12% versus our 0.15. Theirs is lower. They have $100,000 exemption. So, you know, sometimes we punish businesses with more forms to fill out, and then we also punish them when we give them a penalty for not filling out the dark form. So that's my 30 cents worth.
30 cents.
Councilor Johnson?
Yeah, this is a wonderful tool. Okay. So there are a couple of directions I could go with this. One of the things I was thinking about is that with the public safety sales tax, there is a little bit of risk, and this is true also for the levy lid lift, in that we'd be asking the voters for it, and they could say no. If we, instead of doing the public safety sales tax, did the utility tax, can we see what that does? Oh, and the first one as well. Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of similar.
This one, which one's this one?
So this would be the transportation tax and the utility tax, I believe. Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of similar to the last one. Yeah, that would get us above the orange line as well. There are a couple of those union contracts that are still outstanding that could bump that orange line up, if I remember correctly, and make the lines cross a little bit earlier. Can we just compare that to one more time, switching it back to the one we just had, which was public safety and utility. Okay, yeah, so the utility versus public safety, I think had it even, or excuse me, the transportation and utility, I think had it out a little bit farther than these two.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
So one thing I want us to consider though is some of these taxes are constrained to just the citizens and businesses of Snoqualmie. Some of these, particularly sales tax, also expand out to grab those who come into our city and actually are using some of these services and not contributing to their support right now. And I kind of like the one, I like going out and asking the public if they want to, if they're amenable to this. I kind of like the 1% for public safety in that right now we have no mechanism of no true mechanism under which we are recuperating some of those public safety costs is part of our labor costs, big chunk of it that is going up. That we're not getting outside revenue to help us. It's all self-contained inside. I'm a little leery of the utility, just because again, you're hitting directly constrained to the businesses. There's no added splash benefit.
Councilor Christensen.
From where I'm sitting as well, I agree with, the Mayor Pro Tem that I would like to see the tax increases come from not just our residents and people who come and use our police or fire as needed, roads, everything like that. So I'd like to focus on that. I have some significant hesitations about doing the levy lid lift and with utility taxes as well, just because it would really concentrate the costs on our own citizens. And just because we are predominantly getting most of our income basically from property taxes, and I don't want to see that situation get worse, as we know that
Shouldn't
inflation will
increase the
continue to go up.
percentage of the pie.
Yeah, we should be moving in the other direction and diversifying a lot more. I do also want to flag, in addition to going through the ongoing negotiations with police and fire, we are at some point in the near future going to need to have a conversation about the amount of staffing that we have in the fire department, because we're seeing those call volumes go up 22% or more, and we still have the same number of folks working. So I do think that in the near future, we're gonna have to talk about
There's less.
adding folks.
There's
in
less
order to
because
cover
they're
that.
out
Yeah.
on injuries and medical leaves and things like that.
Yeah, so I think that we would need to go forward with those. I'd also like the opportunity to get input. I know that there's folks here, before, moving too far ahead in B&O taxes and things like that. So I'd like to hear from our businesses and the chamber as well.
Councilor Cotton.
I think
And then-
Councilmember.
Go ahead. I'll
Go ahead.
you.
My question is in regards to, since we are able to recoup transportation costs for fire department transports with the Medicare, Medicaid patients, which affects predominantly the non-residents of the city. Since isn't it still in effect that the residents of Snoqualmie do not get charged for emergency transports?
I'm not positive on that, so I'll have to look into that question.
They do get charged now. Okay, all right. So, I just was wondering if there's any way to, what was that? That was over like 300,000 a year for, that was starting to come back in.
Yeah,
And, certainly some tweaking can be done if we were to get up to staff where we could do more of our own transports and generate more revenue with that. Where can that be earmarked for public safety as far as, like with these potential labor negotiations coming up, can that kind of, since it's coming from fire, a public safety organization, instead of going into the general fund, could that be, set aside for public safety, personnel, increases and such?
well, I don't think we have a tendency within the general fund in order to set aside money here or there necessarily.
Or
But,
move that to that type of, knowing these things are coming up and trying to be proactive.
yeah, that's
about
what
them.
we're trying to be proactive. So indeed, any sort of additional revenue that we could generate, right, from ambulance transports will certainly be key to helping us create a sustainable general fund into the future. The fire department itself is paid for not just by ambulance transport fees or the ground emergency medical transport billing, but it's also relying upon property taxes, sales taxes,
Oh,
utility
absolutely.
taxes in order to continue to fund it. So it will certainly help if any sort of revenue source that we can generate as a part of the general fund that may not represent a tax increase, we will certainly be wanting to look at very carefully about how we can accomplish that. So if you're suggesting that we can increase the number of transports that we do that will help us to generate more revenue, then maybe that's an option. We want to make sure as well that we're not overburdening the department itself with the staff that we currently have, which is part of the equation too. And we don't necessarily want to force departments into requiring them to have, be responsible for generating their own revenue is what I would say. So,
And I
yeah.
wasn't suggesting that, it was
Yeah.
more of being able to use it for, that type of a thing.
Mhm.
Once we got up to staff, that might be,
Mhm.
another consideration.
Yeah, and I think some of the struggles, you don't want to presage how those negotiations would go either, so.
So Councilor Benson was next.
Yeah, thank you. So a few things. I totally agree with everybody's assessment that the more we can get tourists to pay our taxes, the better. I'm a huge fan of that. There was one, what was the slide right before this? It had a wider gap in it for a longer period of time.
That's if you did everything.
If we did everything, go to that one.
Yeah, there we go.
Go to that one. Yeah, I really don't like that one. I'm not trying to be facetious. I really hate this one because I know that it's not true. I know that if we have that money, we will spend it. We will figure it will get gobbled up and it will be, we will just get to this crisis again, just more extravagantly. So I really don't like that one. I'd like to, my personal opinion is that we do what we can, have tourists do as much of the work for us as we can. The ones that really concern me, I don't like utility tax. That seems kind of big to me. I was looking in Agenda Bill 04, there was a discussion about potentially increasing car tabs to $50. Did I misunderstand that one?
Well, I think we were explaining some of the background basically. So,
Okay,
the voters basically approved a 0.2% transportation sales tax back, I believe, in 2021, which replaced the $40 vehicle TBD fee at that time. And so consequently, the cost of a TBD vehicle fee is completely borne by the residents of the city. So transitioning to the sales tax itself was identified as something that would potentially save our residents money by doing that, while generating more money for our street resurfacing program, maintaining our streets, maintaining our sidewalks, as well as supporting things when, any sort of kind of pavement or sidewalks that we may need to.
my personal feeling is that
Mhm.
citizens of Snoqualmie will be able to swallow a small sales tax increase better than a car tab increase, because that's a tax that we can share with people from outside the city. So if we because it feels like we said, okay, we're gonna not have the car tabs go big
Mhm.
a few years ago, and then if we now say, okay, well, now we're gonna that's gonna tick some people off, I think. Also, I have a different view on presenting to the voters the public safety tax. I like the opportunity to present that and allow voters to either approve it or not. That's what they're supposed to do. And what I've seen, my understanding, and I could have the pulse wrong, but what I'm seeing is that the voters are not interested in reducing services. They are willing to pay for services, and they are willing to do so in reasonable ways. And to say, look, this is a public safety increase. This money is going to go toward public safety, minus the county's taste. But it's going to go to public safety. I think voters are going to say that feels reasonable to me. And if they don't, then that's also an important data point. Because if voters say, yeah, not that important to me, well, that gives us important data on levels of service. And I don't think that's the data point that we're going to get. I think people are going to say, I mean, I had to call the fire department because my father-in-law was having a blood pressure thing. They were at my house in 90 seconds. When I was on the ridge, I had to call the fire department because my mother-in-law came to visit, had an aneurysm. As she walked in the door, they were at my house in 5 minutes. I don't want my levels of service decreased. I don't want that. And I don't think the citizens of Snoqualmie want it either. And I think to allow the citizens of Snoqualmie the opportunity to vote on that and say so themselves is a good thing.
So Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and then Councilor Johnson.
Gotta remember points. So one, we in essence, we, the council, have already set our expectations of level of service. We did that as part of the budget conversation. We said, police officers 24/7 and administration to support that, it's gonna be this. Okay, and as well as the fire and everything else. We set that. Okay, so if you believe we didn't do a job and set that at what we thought was the appropriate level, that's part of the budget conversation we can have. I believe we had that conversation to get that look off your face.
Well, I don't want to get straw man here for saying something.
we're not
like
No,
that.
no,
Yeah.
I'm just, because we did talk about, we need to go back and, Councilor Watton was bringing it up, we need to go back and scrub some of these things, and because we're seeing high levels of OT. Part of that is, we did set level of service. We have been unable to man up just because of the environment to those levels of service. And the way you fill that gap is you do OT to cover it. So yes, you did get a premium on that OT, but what we're seeing is the gaps are still we're not incurring that cost of full level service support that we thought we were, just because we can't do the man up. Okay? Either one of the chiefs can correct me if I'm wrong. Please. And yeah, and the other part, I mean, guys, we should never try to have this chart with a gap at the end. Because again, your major source is property taxes. It is structurally inverted. But that was kind of what the people wanted, to have us do that struggle and to go on to try to do those balancing act, and where it doesn't work anymore, to come back to them to say, hey, I got to do a levy lid lift to make these, maintain these level of services, or to do something else. Here's our case, we go to them, okay? But that 1% will always be inverted. We'll never have inflation at 1%. You don't want it at that level.
Councilor
I'm
Johnson.
shutting up.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with everything that Councilmember Benson just said. Bravo. I second anything that was a motion in there. I don't think there was. If there was, I would have seconded it. People love feeling safe. And I think that there's a very high probability that if we go to the voters for that particular one, that will be passed. There's a problem though. If we turn those on, just the 0.1% sales tax for the transportation and the 1% for public safety. Then let us get that ready. I don't think that's enough. I don't think that gets us to where we need to be. We still have a couple of contract negotiations that are going to tick up that orange line. I think that maybe they'll get us to the next biennium, but that makes me a little bit nervous. We don't have ARPA coming in for us to bump things up again. I think that leaves us with having to pick one more from the list. Now, the B&O tax, I think, is the smallest based on my very rough estimate from the slideshow going by. I am nervous about what that could do to our business community. As Councilmember Christensen said, I'd love to hear from our business community and hear about their opinions on that, since they would be the ones most affected by it. But I'm skeptical of how much that one is going to help. The levy lift that has been proposed is a significant amount. One possibility is we look at, perhaps we don't need $500,000 per year.
Pick a number.
Say again?
You can pick a number.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we don't need that much. We could go ask for less. But that one does get slightly more risky, but still, based on the community survey, I think we have a decent chance of getting there on that one as well. But again, it's a little bit more risky, and that brings us back to the utility tax, where that's $5 per month per customer. That's a cup of coffee to keep the lights on for a couple more years. I'm just not convinced that those two sales taxes alone will be enough. I think that we need to pick one. That's my opinion.
Can we add in the
Excuse me?
utility
Counselor Cotton.
Thank you, Mayor. Can we add in the utility tax increase and see what that, oh, you just did, thank you.
That's like too much. Can we lower those a little bit?
Oh,
More?
look at the end of it. Look
Yeah,
at-
yeah.
You can pick
yeah,
a number, any number you want on any one of them.
And it was a good point too, sir.
Sure.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
Counselor Christensen.
Thank you. I was just gonna say, it's good to remember too, just that the lines will cross much sooner once we finish the union negotiations as well. So, well,
So-
it looks, great right now. It's just.
Yeah, so my point is that I just don't think that those two are gonna be enough.
Counselor Benson.
So the utility tax increase that we were shown was raising it from 9 to 12.
Correct.
Was that right? Can we, what if it was just a 1% increase? Or something in that neighborhood? Would that be significant enough or no? To,
So that's roughly, I think, $123,000. I'm correct, basically. Per year, we can certainly bring back that option as well. Not, Jana might be trying to calculate. So,
Programming issue.
yeah, programming as we go along here.
Counselor Christensen. I'm sorry.
But it's a possibility for sure. It's scalable as well.
And I was just gonna ask, if we have a utility rate increase in terms of taxes, do we know what the effect would be on the businesses? Would any of them be disproportionately affected compared to the rest? Offhand, but.
Not offhand, it's based on the utility rates that we set overall as the city. So when we talk about equity between the different customer classes, we know, for example, that the residents pay
Pay much
more for the cost of service than the business community does right now. And so it's a consequence over the 6-year rate schedule that we currently have. And I know we've just updated it for 2024. The goal was to actually reduce the multifamily rate because they were the highest payers, basically, based on the cost of service provided to them. So they are generally benefiting right in terms of the utility rates right now.
Counselor Ben, oh, excuse me.
Sorry. Jana, is that showing the dollar? So that's.
is that the 1% with a 1% increase?
It's better.
Counselor Benson.
Also, have we considered the B&O tax, but raising the exemption level potentially? So that our smallest businesses, the businesses that are starting out, that are the most vulnerable, are less impacted. That mean, and of a real argument could be made that that's an unfair way to look at how to do that, and I'm totally willing to listen to those arguments as well. But that might be a way to soften an option like that as well. I think the sense that I'm getting is that we're trying to figure out the best way to address the problem while having the least damaging effect on businesses and residents in Snoqualmie.
Yeah.
So that's the sense that I'm getting from everyone else. So insofar as we can reduce the impact of these options, I think I'm getting the sense that that's what we're in favor of.
Counselor Johnson.
Yeah, one other issue with regard to the levy lid lift would be if we went for both the public safety sales tax to the voters and for a levy lid lift, then we could end up with people splitting their vote between the two and not giving us essentially both, in which case we could actually end up with neither one, when one of them, especially perhaps the public safety sales tax, if I were guessing, might be the more popular. We might end up not getting that, though we would have if that had gone on the ballot alone.
Another thing to consider as well is that the school district may be going out as well.
Mhm.
Same time period, so we would be competing with those as well.
Yep.
So keep that in mind.
Agreed.
Mr. Shill couldn't hear that last.
Oh, can you repeat what you said?
Oh, I just mentioned that it's my understanding that the school district is also going out as well for a bond, so we would be competing to the extent that we went forward with the public safety sales tax as well as a levy lid lift. So it may not be maybe a.
Counselor Watton.
Yeah, and The other thing that's in the back of my mind and whatever we choose to go out to the voters on, we have one other thing that we haven't discussed that's almost seems like the luxury right now, and that's the expansion of the Y and how we're going to find the funding for that. And we have many different avenues, so that may change our direction on our options too. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, no.
The one
Well,
versus the.
Yeah, no.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
No, yeah, I agree.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
I don't want you to get all.
I did it this time.
Yeah, I mean, we know I have an issue between at least the desire and the current funding and community center. Okay, but it's kind of a difference between a capital and an operating. That's kind of a capital project. And we should look for that kind of funding. These are more operational fundings, with the exception of the TBD. That would be more focused in on just our general fund, the basic services of fire, police, parks, city administration. So these are kind of ongoing revenue sources, with the exception of the TBD, which is restricted. So, and keep that in mind, the TBD increase may not put the money where you want it to go.
Well, so let me just, there's also operations and maintenance as a part of the TBD sales tax too. In addition to that, we do know that we are putting 3% of our utility tax, so the rate from 6 to 9% on water, sewer, and stormwater into capital. We may come back, for example, on agenda bill, if council wants to move in that direction, that would then, and if they happen to approve, you happen to approve the 0.1% transportation sales tax, moving that into the capital fund and then taking the 3% utility tax out of the capital fund and moving that back into the general fund, which is coming from. So there's some movement that we could do in order to make it fit, I would say. Yeah.
And I started and I stopped.
Oh, Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
I do want to, when we did the switch from tabs to taxes, there was discussion at that time of doing it at the 0.3 level versus the 0.2. We kind of tried to figure out how to balance that, collect what we were before, but doing it through a different mechanism, which is not a clean calculation. And we kind of settled on the 0.2, but considering that the Parkway is not shifting the way we thought it was going to shift, at least not immediately, we still got a lot of infrastructure. We got to maintain that. We've got a lot of other infrastructure up here on the ridge, which is coming up on 20 some years that we're going to have to get into.
So if I could just respond to that, I don't think the 0.1% councilmanic option was available to us at that time. That's relatively newly available to us from the state legislature after that vote took place.
Yeah, we did discuss varying levels of what we thought, how much.
Within the 0.2%, I believe, but
Yeah, we settled at 0.2.
Were we able to go higher than 0.2? Or
no,
that was the
I
maximum?
think
That
I
was
think the
maximum?
legislature basically allows us to do that based on their previous session last year or the year before
Yeah,
that.
yeah, but when we passed it,
We passed it,
did we have the
did
ability to
0.2,
go
and
higher? No?
I
Okay.
think
there
we
was
were
maximum
allowed to
0.2.
look at it. I'm pretty sure we looked at something a little more. But really it was, how do we collect what we were collecting and also more evenly spread it between not just the citizens of Snoqualmie, but those coming in and spending money within the city. We settled at 0.2. Vague memory, I think we had an option to go higher, but in the meantime, it was set at 0.2. In the meantime, the state legislature has given us the authority to raise it by another point. Irregardless of what that history was.
0.1, yeah.
Yeah, another 0.1, sorry.
Okay, so I'm hearing some momentum. hopefully. And if I could try to summarize what that momentum kind of looks like overall. I think maybe the majority of council might be in support of the TBD sales tax and potentially that bringing that forward to council. I think generally there's potentially a majority here that would be in sort of the public safety sales tax. And then ideally, potentially a scalable option between the utility tax as well as maybe the B&O tax as well. If we can bring back those two options together and have a discussion about either one of those for maybe a decision point in the future.
I still want to see.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
Still want to see the council on B&O. I don't want to make Snoqualmie a worse business environment than other communities. So let's look at those comps before we go too deep into the B&O.
Yeah. Did that kind of make sense or match maybe what?
There are some deadlines.
There's certainly some deadlines. So I think ideally we would bring to council next Monday the TBD sales tax. There's an opportunity for council to waive the second reading of the ordinance. The reason that we may ask you to waive that second reading is because in order to notify the Department of Revenue by January the 16th, this is the last council meeting before that date. If we go beyond that date, then we wouldn't likely start collecting any of this revenue until August, September at the earliest. It would just get us about 3 months sooner, basically, of collecting revenue in order to support our reoccurring deficit that you see here.
Because it's based on a quarterly. You
Yes,
can't
correct.
just submit it next
Mhm.
month and think it's gonna
Mhm.
go in. It's
Mhm.
quarterly basis. So, right, it expands it out.
Do check on the implementation because I thought it was 1 quarter for them to basically initiate that out to the community and another quarter for them to start collecting it.
Yeah.
So talk with Department of Revenue, what the process is we go through on this.
Thank you. But you understand it already, right? Okay, so
Mhm.
we have to submit to them by January 16th. In
That's
order-
their deadline. In order to get it in place by the quarter, so April 1st, which means there's always a lag because then they start collecting at that time because the retail sales don't happen until it actually starts happening in that month. It has to then get reported by the business to Department of Revenue. Then they have to collect the revenue and then remit it back to us. So, yeah.
And our sales tax, I think, is like a 2-month delay by the time
Mm.
we ever see it. So,
Yes. Yep.
Right.
Mhm.
Do we
Councilor
have a
Benson?
process within the city communications when we are going to waive a second reading to alert the city that coming up on Monday is going to be the only reading of a bill before there's a vote? Because if there was a way for us to get some kind of all hands on deck communication wise, maybe put a flag on the website. I know that our website is very well trafficked by people who would make public comment. If we had some kind of banner that let people know, hey, just so you know, there's going to be a waiving of a second reading on an important agenda bill that's coming before council on Monday. So we could get something like that up so that people could react and respond to that, the better. Because I know that there are a whole bunch of people up here that are very antsy whenever we waive a second reading. Or at least I know I'm one of them. Maybe I'm misreading all y'all, but I don't think I am.
but I think through our communications department, they can, send out information, what we are looking at and their potential waive of the second readings. You would have to vote during council to do that. So, but it'd be, we state something like that. Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
So, I hear what you're saying on all this. Guys, these are not event decisions. These are long-term decisions. I'm a little reluctant to waive the second reading. I know that may cause us impact as far as when the revenue comes in. But these are, again, long-term decisions. What we put in place goes for 20 years. It's just not for the rest of this year. So holding off, it's just near term, but it doesn't really affect us long term that much. So I'm a little reluctant to waive second reading.
Councilor-
We're not in a fire sale.
Right, Councilor Vincent?
Well, I think I think that's an important argument to make on Monday night. If there's the proposal in the agenda bill that we waive the second reading, we're all gonna vote on that. And I absolutely think you should vote against it if that's your conscience, because I totally understand that. But as far as I'm concerned, if we know that there's a potential that we are going to waive a second reading enough in advance that our communications department can let the public know that that's a possibility. I would like those interested parties to have the opportunity to be here as much as possible.
Or submit written comments.
Say again,
I
or
said
submit
or submit
written comment. Yeah. Do we have to stop talking because they're talking?
When it's our legal counsel, maybe.
I'd like to introduce, this is Kim Pratt. She's with Moderna Law and she's filling in for Dave Linehan this evening.
And sorry for the whispering on the side. I wanted to check myself. I saw this as being a special meeting of council. This matter was on the agenda. So this was in my mind, this was your first reading and Monday would be the second. That's why I was trying to check, because this is a special meeting. You could vote on these things tonight. I don't hear anyone wanting to do that, but I think Monday would be your second reading.
Councilor Watton.
Point of information, then public comment would be accepted Monday night
Mhm.
before we make a decision.
Oh, absolutely. It always is. Yeah. Councilor Johnson.
And as such, then, would it be appropriate on the first reading to also hear public comment?
That was my question too.
That'd be up to.
Yeah, it's up to council.
Yes, up to council. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Mallory.
So I hear your interpretation. However, the intent was to discuss the options tonight. Yes, they were presented as agenda bills, but there was no intent for us to act on those agenda bills. So I personally don't consider this as first reading. This is a discussion of options. And I don't think we, the council, should do that. Your guys' call.
But our attorney is telling us that it could be considered,
It could.
right?
I'm suggesting we don't.
Councilor Benson.
To Councilman Holloway's point, on our agenda, there is no place for public comment. And if there were a first reading, we would almost always have, I think we would always have public comment during a normal first reading of a bill. So I could see an argument there that this, although maybe technically could count as a first reading, it's an unorthodox first reading.
Councilor Johnson.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. I can see both sides. It certainly would be unorthodox in that typically when we read in a bill, the chair of the committee that the bill was introduced from to council or was forwarded to council from would read a summary statement of some
Need a
sort,
motion.
and we have not done that. And then after that occurs, then typically the mayor at the mayor's discretion, I'm not sure if it's in our rules or not, I'd have to check, but ask for public comment for that bill. So if we did that tonight, I would be more likely to consider this to be a first reading. If we didn't do that, I'd be less likely to think of it as a first reading personally. And I hear what the attorney is saying as well, that maybe that's not what the legal thing would be if someone wanted to sue us over it. But just personally, how I'm like trying to think of it ethically, that's where my mind's going.
Do you want to read it in? Or do we just wait for
The
Monday?
Intent tonight was to discuss options. Okay, and they, admittedly, they were presented as agenda bills, but the intent was to discuss options and give staff some direction of where to go. Because we could have flipped these numbers to any amount we wanted, okay? If somebody wants to read it in and make a motion, go ahead. I, as chair of F&A, will not. I don't believe that was the intent tonight.
Counselor Benson?
I feel like the cow's out of the barn on us making, on at least making council feel comfortable that this was a first reading. Just because of the different nature of tonight's meeting and that it wasn't advertised as a meeting where public comment would be taken. So I don't think it would be fair at this point, whether legal or not, for us to treat this like it was a first reading. So if there is the potential that we are going to waive this, a second reading on Monday night, I would be much happier if our communications director was going full bore to try and let people know that that is a possibility to happen on Monday night.
And we,
Predicate the direction.
okay. They're already planning it now.
Say again?
It's already being planned right now, your
Fantastic.
direction, so. Any other? Comments, Counselor Christensen?
I think I would just like some clarification. I have a pretty good read on how people feel about moving forward with waiving a second read. And it's my understanding that to the extent that that's being discussed at all, that's being focused on the TBD sales tax increase and not any of the other potential options. Is that accurate? Just the one that would have to get done by January 16th, as opposed to, for example, potentially waiving, you know, a second read on the levy lid lift or the other ones, right? I just want to make
see.
sure that I'm on the same page as everyone else. Or are folks considering potentially waiving a second read on the others? Because those to me are very distinguishable. I have my own hesitations about ever waiving a second read unless we are in a situation that has to be addressed really quickly and we don't have other options. But at least for now, it's my understanding that the only one that's super time sensitive at this point would be the January 16th, the TBD sales tax. Is that accurate?
Mm,
Or is that not?
What's
the-
that?
the-
So
the
wait a minute,
Sales tax one.
excuse me.
Go ahead.
So then. What did you, you were
Yeah,
speaking
I
to
was
that,
just gonna
Counselor
say,
Johnson?
yeah, that, at least in the agenda, only, AB 24-004, which is the, TBD tax, was the one being considered for waiving. None of the other ones say anything about it. So that was my assumption as well. That's the only one that was being
Okay,
considered.
You're
Have to be.
you're right.
Does that make
Safety
sense?
has to go to a vote.
I don't want the perception to be that we're
Yeah.
considering going forward with all 5 of these options without getting adequate public notice, without getting adequate public comment, things like that. I don't want that to be the perception that we're trying to sneak something through. And
absolutely.
obviously, you know, folks are being very clear that we want public comment, that we want, you know, the interaction from the public. I don't want someone to come back and try to, I guess, say that, you know, we're not doing that.
We're reaching into people's wallets here, so, you know.
So we can discuss then the one TBD on Monday. And then do we also have further discussions on the others during council as well? Mr. Johnson?
If, staff, could be prepared by then to bring us something about the utility, tax and, the BNO tax, then, I suppose, but I think the only other one that I heard broad support, from, that I interpreted as having broad support from at present is the public safety tax. So if we could get moving on that and get in front of voters, as soon as possible, it sounded like that could be beneficial to us. But again, I just want to caution the council that I really don't think that those two alone would be enough. I think that we've got to go for one of the other ones. And if staff needs more time to look into, how those would scale, et cetera, then fine.
So.
Yeah.
I just wanted to offer some comments. So the public safety sales tax, we have to offer this resolution up to King County, which I think their next available deadline for that is May the 3rd, if I'm correct, basically. I think we're past the deadline in which we can have something sooner. I think we get it to them by May the 3rd, then we'll go on at least the August primary election would be the next available one. So just
So it's not emergent that we get that one done.
no. I would say I mean, we'd love to have council's, support and moving forward on some of these agenda bills so that we do have sufficient time in order to work out any sort of issues with King County, make sure that everything's correct. So. Mhm.
So should we bring that, Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
I just want to reflect, come back the other way from what you said. I didn't hear a no on the BNO. I heard
Yeah.
more discussion.
Yes,
Right.
More
Yep.
information.
yep,
Mhm.
that's right.
With comps included.
Yes, please.
If you want.
Yeah. Well,
Take a look at the agenda.
Maybe Jeff.
No, Councilor Cotton?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank the finance department for all their hard work, especially Jana over the holidays,
Mhm.
writing up all these agenda bills, above and beyond from both of you. Thank you
no, thank
for
you.
the responsiveness and
Yeah.
Mhm. No, I've got an incredible team and we're lucky to have Jana, seriously. So.
That tool.
Both of them.
Really cool
Yeah.
too. This is,
So what does the tool look like with the TBD and public safety only? And if we took action on TBD only. Twenty 26. Okay. Did you, City Administrator Chambliss?
I really want to get Jenna the credit for developing that tool.
Good.
We had a meeting and I'm like, I had this guy who used to be able to do this. And she's all, oh, it's right here. So this is all her. She gets all the credit, 5 gold stars.
really helpful.
Really helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Super.
So Monday, we plan to bring the TBD sales tax to council.
Mhm.
Public safety sales tax sounds like we are considering that, but we maybe put that on the next agenda. Or you want it on this?
So we certainly, it could come back for the first reading on Monday and then it would be the second reading for the second meeting in January for the most part. And then I think ideally we'll bring back scaled versions of the utility tax ordinance as well as the B&O tax ordinance. Now, in terms of our timing, that leaves a day, 2 days basically to try to get that done. So we may have some complications in terms of getting the data. So we may have to delay those until the next second January meeting.
Yeah, so let's do that. So Councilor Johnson?
So just then on the TBD, then if staff could try to have as much information for us as possible as to what the potential cost could be if we delayed. Because that would have a potential significant effect on how I would feel about waiving. I mean, if you're telling us it's going to cost us $1 million, I don't know, that's a lot. If you're telling me it's going to cost us $1,000, then it's like, I think that we could probably swing it. Right.
Mhm.
I just don't know what it is. So if we could just have that information
Mhm.
as best as you can give us, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah. Mhm.
Councilor Watton?
Thank you, Mayor. There are a couple things in the back of my mind because we're projecting these numbers on existing sales and existing retail activity that's going on. But keep in mind in 2025, spring of 2025, the casinos hotel will bring more visitors to the valley, and that will result in higher sales tax revenue and still higher probably B&O tax revenues without changing things. And secondly is that the mill site's been approved, and I think it's another impetus. The reason why we need to grow our tax base by growing our economy and the mill site, and we're probably looking at 26, 27, 28. So, as we're looking at these numbers, they're only based on today's activities, not what is potential. Of course, we can't project that. It may not be as bad as it looks. It may be worse. based, there are a lot of factors. I mean, it could be worse with the contract negotiations, but this is our best guess today.
Mhm.
And I just want to point that out, that we're not doing a knee-jerk reaction of overreacting and overtaxing
Mhm.
when maybe in a year and a half, things look more prosperous. So anyway, just to balance the
No, and-
discussion.
I mean, that's the reason why we bring back the financial forecast so often to council, is to see how those kind of parameters and assumptions have changed within the last quarter. Certainly with the Teamsters contract, some of the parameters have changed that we now have to focus on trying to. So I think I've certainly been at a previous city, right, for the most part, where not a lot of this is actually done. In terms of presenting a financial forecast to council. And so this is a city that does not operate in the dark, and we operate ahead of any of the sort of the problems that are coming up. So we know we've certainly got some lines crossing in the future, but at least we're preparing for it today. And I think that's commendable of what council's doing here and what they've done in the past as well to stay on top of that. So I think the administration thanks you for your guys' effort. Hopefully the citizens commend you for that as well. I know it's a thankless job up there, but it is really, really critical that we continue to stay on this moving forward. So.
Councillor Johnson?
And then the green line does not include expansion of the mill site, is that correct?
That is right.
Right, because we don't want to count our chickens before they hatch.
Mhm.
Okay, so on Monday, we will do the TBD and also public safety agenda bills. And then the other two, B&O and utility tax will be delayed most likely to the second meeting in January and review that. Right?
Mhm.
Does that work? Right? Okay. Any other comments or discussion? Okay. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Watton and second by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway. All those in favor, say aye.
I.
I
Any opposed, nay? We are adjourned.